So hello everyone and welcome to the first talk in the new series of CFPR Lunchtime Talks. So they're going to run every Wednesday lunchtime for the next 6 weeks after this. Really pleased to introduce you to our first speaker, who is Catherine Cartwright. So Catherine graduated from MA Printmaking at UWE in 2018, continued with her practice, working around trauma-informed practice, and then did her PhD, which was a collaborative funded PhD between Exeter and UWE, and she completed that in 2024. She's been very busy since as an artist and academic, currently writing some articles and working on her own practice. So she's here to talk to you today about, some of the practices and things that she's learned about working with trauma-informed community arts practices. Over to you, Catherine. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this lunchtime. Thanks, Sarah, for the introduction. So today I'm going to spend about half of the talk, sort of 5-10 minutes, talking about what is trauma, because it's quite a kind of nebulous term and could perhaps mean a few different things. And then the other half of the talk, I'll be proposing some ideas about what it means to be a trauma-informed community artist. So it's not uncommon for artists to be working with different groups, working in different communities, because it's a good way to make a living, but also it's what motivates a lot of us in our practice is by kind of by working in communities and making art happen. So I will be talking about kind of what trauma is and how it affects your body and mind and so on. It can be unsettling or uncomfortable. Just do what works for you, really, if that means walking around, taking a break, leaving the talk and coming back to the recording later. You've all got your cameras off, so you can do whatever works for you without feeling self-conscious. So very briefly, my PhD research was asked the question, like, what is trauma-informed community arts practice? What does it mean to kind of hold a safe space? What does it mean to kind of not cause further harm or to compound people's trauma? And then as part of that research, I interviewed lots of UK community artists who working in lots of different contexts, such as prisons, hospitals, and so on. And I ran 2 6-week collage projects with current service users at Devon Rape Crisis and Sexual Abuse Services, where I was also working as a helpline volunteer. And I'd also had a relationship with them through my master's at UWE as well. And then afterwards asked them if I could interview them about the collage project. So just to be clear, I wasn't interviewing them about their experiences of trauma. I wasn't asking them about what happened to them. I was asking them about how they felt the collage project had gone, what they thought about collage itself, and so on. Yeah, it was a really, really interesting experience. So what is trauma? We talk about it a lot. It's a very popular term in our culture. You might think of it as or know it as PTSD. That's a medical term. I've got this slide up here. I find this a useful theory of trauma from a feminist lens, from a feminist psychologist, Judith Herman. you know, it's obviously not as simple as this, but this is quite a helpful framing to start with in terms of acute trauma. Those are those kind of infrequent, life-interrupting events that will happen to all of us, bereavement or illness, or it might be something that happens around birth or so on. But what really counts is the support from friends and family around this. Generally, the after effects will dissipate. Chronic trauma, however, is something that's going on over a period of time, and it's very much kind of related to oppressive power dynamics. So domestic violence, domestic abuse is a very good example of chronic trauma, where it's a pattern of behavior over a period of time that that kind of can cause sort of actual changes in how someone views the world. And then we'll generally have kind of a longer, a kind of long afterwards in terms of rebuilding lives. Complex trauma is also very impacting. You might think of this more as developmental trauma. So experiences that are happening from childhood that layer up through life. The effects from complex trauma can be latent, which means that your body protects you as a child. Part of that might be kind of a kind of form of amnesia that then later on in adulthood, that those traumatic effects can surface. And then compounded trauma is when something's happened to you and it's made worse because the people that are supposed to be helping you, in the way that they help you, not necessarily on purpose, it makes it worse. So I don't want to get too far into it because we've just got a short talk. Okay, so I'd like to point out the relationship between power dynamics and trauma. So trauma, much kind of that chronic trauma is caused by socio-political kind of structural forces, poverty, racism, misogyny. You know, so this is different to how you might view trauma as something that it was traditionally thought of as something that happened out of the ordinary and something that was very much just about the individual. But this viewpoint really thinks about, like, okay, this is the way that our society and our culture is constructed, and these effects like misogyny causes gender-based violence, for example. And then also, like natural disasters, you might think they're really not natural. We understand that more now, but they're going to also, the impact of that will cause more trauma in communities that are already marginalized through poverty or colonialism, for example. So don't worry if that doesn't make sense straight away, but it's just to kind of point out that relationship between trauma and power. Okay, because that it kind of makes a difference for how you are as a trauma-informed artist. So the other point on this slide is just to emphasize that, you know, potentially traumatizing experiences happen to us all, but it is more likely if you're marginalized in society. And trauma is part of life, but what counts is the support that you receive at the time and afterwards. So this is where trauma-informed approaches come in. How services, and I'm like including artists in that, how artists respond to victims has a big effect on their rebuilding and the kind of life afterwards. So a bit more about trauma, but I will go quite quickly, and then you could come back to the recording if you want to look into this some more, because there's a lot to say. It's just to say that coping with trauma means that your body and mind are still more sensitive to trying to protect you. So if your body was protected during a traumatic experience because you froze, for example, or you kind of disassociated, then it might be more sensitive to kind of disassociating you in less risky but still seemingly risky situations. So it's not only kind of mental health that can get worse because of trauma, but also your physical health. And that's been evidenced and it's become a lot clearer over recent years. And so then key to, if you're an artist working, for example, with women impacted by gender-based violence, the key is kind of understanding how behavior and emotions and feelings are changed because someone is coping with the after effects of trauma. So shame, for example, is a big is a very kind of common after effect of being impacted by gender-based violence. And for example, that can lead to avoiding others, avoiding help, but you might consider how that might change their behavior in an art setting, in an art workshop. Maybe they just wouldn't even come at all because of the way it's set up. They feel it's too difficult to come. There's a kind of shame, anxiety. So what does it mean to be a trauma-informed artist? So there's 4 points here. At the end, the last slide has a QR code to a 2-minute animation that I made that is about these kind of 4 guidelines, or you could call them provocations. They're more things to reflect on. If you're an artist that works in different communities, there's something to reflect on as part of your practice. So carefree connection. So trauma can be really disconnecting, partly because of the shame that I just spoke about. So partly because it's hard to trust, like the world feels very unsafe. So that care through feeling cared about and connected to others is part of recovering from trauma. So it's how we create a safe space of collective care. So back to that point about the power dynamics, it's understanding that oppressive structural forces cause trauma and can make trauma worse if you have disempowering dynamics in ongoing relationships. So as an artist or an arts organization, you need to think about, okay, where is the power here? I have the power, I know what's going on. The artist is the protagonist, and kind of really reflect on and examine what those power dynamics are and seek to, as far as possible, create spaces that are full of choice for the people that you work with, that they're full of, like, create, as an artist, stepping back and creating spaces for the people that you work with to kind of fill those spaces with their thoughts and choices and ideas about the work that you're making. What I'm saying is a bit vague, but I hope there's enough there that makes sense. Time, well, time can be really hard to come by, and as an artist, you may well not have control over the amount of time you have. It may be that an organization's brought you in for kind of a one-off workshop or 3 workshops or something like that. Ideally, if you have the time, then you've got time to build trust. And because trauma makes people feel easily unsafe. Time is also really important so that artists can reflect, can see what's going on, can pay attention to kind of rising feelings of discomfort. That might be related to something ethical. It might be just related to feeling overwhelmed in yourself. That discomfort might be related to your own lived experience or your own trauma. And so if you've got time built in for that care, and that care and support from whoever you're working with, it's just, you know, it's vital. And then the last one, and the most important one, I think, is that the artists who are working in these contexts need to be supported, because it's hard work. You know, if you're working with groups, there is a real high level of relational expertise that is needed, that many of you who I'm sure are experienced in this already embody that implicitly. You know, that's what's, you know, you're drawn to the work for, you know, for the right motivation, and you're not there with your ego. You're there creating space for other people, creating opportunities for them to take part. But as trauma is part of life, not, you know, the acute trauma that I spoke about before, or chronic or complex trauma, it, you know, it might be that you might be more easily affected by the work. Artists need to be looked after by the organisations that employ them, not only with the emotional support, but also operational support. You know, you need to be not doing extra labour chasing invoices, for example. All those things that are so common, but just add up to making a more stressful scenario. And so the last point I want to make is that if you support the artists in the work that they do, then they can be the most kind of present, mindful and reflective artists that can then you're more able to kind of respond to kind of any arising discomfort, ethical dilemmas or challenges in the work. And you're more able to kind of take a pause, step back, seek support. But if you're feeling stressed, you will notice in yourself that your mind might not think so clearly because you're in a little bit of kind of flight or fight mode, you know, a little bit of panic. It's harder to be clearer. Or you might you might have put to one side that, oh, you actually feel really tired that day, or you might be going through, you might be grieving, or all kinds of stuff that's going on. But if you can if you can take the time to recognize that, you're less likely that it's then gonna impact on your relational expertise, how you are with the group that you're working with. So the next slide has a QR code to this little animation. It says exactly what I've just said, but feel free to have a look at it if you want to continue some of your own reflection. The talk is recorded, but feel free to take a screenshot if you want to have a look at that at another time. I made this short film with Jean McEwen, who is a really excellent participatory artist, and I learned a lot from her during my PhD about the small details, all the kind of detailed planning that you do to try and create the most comfortable and inspiring, playful spaces. And also the kind of, she works with a huge amount of care and sensitivity, and so I learned a lot, as well as having the fun opportunity to make this animation together. So that is me. That's me finishing. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much. That was so cool, Catherine. There's so much information, and so valuable information as well. That's really tons for people to think about for a short talk. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you so much to Catherine for sharing her time with us today. I put her website link in the chat, and hopefully see you all at the next talk next Wednesday. But thank you all for coming and have a good week. And thank you very much, Catherine.